Hi there, my name's Lucie MacKinlay. I'm clinical psychologist for Looked After Children in Falkirk. I've decided that in order to squeeze in the 7 hours I usually have to talk about this at Edinburgh University, I'm just going to talk really fast, and there's some really heavy slides with lots of information, not for you to read, just for you to have in handouts if they're there. So, accessing services. This post was thought up by Fife Council along with CAMS in Falkirk in order to be able to allow looked after young children to access services in an equitable way. So what we know about young people in care is that they're much less likely to engage with mental health services than young people living at home with their family. They're more likely to refuse to attend, they're more likely to not meet criteria, and they're more likely to just drop out when they get there. And the reason for this is plentiful. Some of the reasons I've put up there include lack of information, no home visits. A really significant one is lack of parental advocacy. It's really daunting when you were looked after child to get out of a taxi and walk into a child and adolescent mental health service and give your name at reception and wait in the waiting room. You don't have a mum or dad there to do it for you. And carer support, there's a big lack of that across the country in CAMS. And of course, on top of that, you've got attachment difficulties. So these young people don't trust in services anyway. Now, unfortunately, with all of that in mind, we know that these young people need services generally more than the average population. They need them because of the ACEs that we've talked about. They come into care most of all because of child abuse and neglect. That's probably about 95% of the children we see have come into care because of that. And we know because of the ACEs study, and of course we knew before the ACEs study, that those are major risk factors to predisposing a child to psychological difficulty in the future. So there's just a nice picture of the ACEs study to tie it all in. So when we looked at developing a looked after children's service, or when I started in the post, we thought about actually, we know that these young people are already very susceptible to mental health, and we know that they're additionally stressed by being in foster care. So the service that we were looking at needed to take into account all of the factors involved in a young person's life. So for one person coming into post had to think of all of these things, not just the mental health of the child, but the system around them, the social workers around them, the foster carers around them, the parents around them, the community they lived in. There was a great deal to take into account. So what I did when I first got to Falkirk is I wanted to know why the young people in care were not being seen regularly in the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. Now, I'm very loyal to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. I work for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. The post was thought up by Falkirk Council, who went to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service and said, look, our young people aren't being seen, or they're not managing to stay there because they're not meeting criteria, or there's something going on. We want our own psychologists, clinical psychologists, to address all of these points. And the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service said, yes, absolutely, we will host them and we will give them to you. So essentially, Falkirk Council pay for an entire psychologist of their own, and I sit within an intensive family support service team. So when I first arrived, I wanted to know, well, why is this? Why are the children not getting seen as much at CAMS as they should? Surely this should be fair for everybody. And so I carried out a survey that looked into, so I started my post at the end of 2011, and I looked at all of the looked after children that had been referred to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service in Falkirk in 2010 and 2011. And what I found was that 50% of the children that were being referred were thought to sit out with the CAMS criteria. Now, these were children that I was looking at were children that were looked after and accommodated. So I think it's probably fair to say that all looked after and accommodated children are traumatised, because being looked after and accommodated is traumatic in itself. Having to leave your family no matter what the circumstances and being placed with foster carers. I was looking at children within foster care and residential placements, not in kinship care. All of those children were likely traumatised, but they were being seen as out with the CAMS criteria. And that was because a great deal of the time they weren't presenting with trauma as their difficulty. They were presenting with behavioural difficulties or attachment problems or relationship problems or just problems that were thought to sit outside it. So 50% were seen straight away. However, they were discharged fairly quickly, and it was seen that an improvement in behaviour meant that, okay, they're doing okay now, we can send them off. A move out of area was a reason to discharge them for CAMHS, and of course they were moving in and out of area all the time, and what I was often reading in notes is, we can't see this child until they're settled. And my response to that was, they're not going to get settled, and they're going to be ping-ponging in and out of the area. Another one was no moderate to severe mental health difficulties, or the changes in placement resulted in an improvement, or simple non-engagement. There was quite a lot of non-engagement. So we decided that we needed to focus our service, I say it like there's lots of us, there's me. There have been more than me. I talk about the looked after children's team, that's me. At the moment, we have had other psychologists come and go, but we decided that we needed a service for everybody. So when I said at the beginning, we're not going to have criteria. The criteria is going to be you're looked after. Everyone said, oh, I'll give that 6 months and we'll see what happens. But I didn't want to create any more gaps in the service. So here we are 6 years on, and we've still got no criteria other than there's a psychological need for these children and young people. And it might not be that I see everybody, it might be that I do something else or signpost them somewhere else, but everyone can be referred if there's a psychological need. And unfortunately, for me, probably, everybody has one, so I get a lot of referrals. So where to provide the psychological input? We needed to provide it with the child, with the family, with the foster carers, with the social worker, residential worker, school, anybody and everyone could benefit from the service. So the model was a full-time clinical psychologist in post, and we've had occasional trainee and assistant input, but it was to prevent placement breakdown. Ultimately, I think the bare bones of it were to reduce the impact of ACEs, but also to save the council some money. If we could get one person not ending up with Dan, then that was going to save a great deal. To prevent, yes, and that would keep me going for years in the council, a year with him. If we could prevent one placement breakdown, then that will prevent all types of escalation in the future. But ultimately to improve the mental health of the looked after children's population. So really it's better for everybody. So I don't expect anyone to read this slide. This is basically what we do, we, on a day-to-day basis. Busy, 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 busy. Lots of assessments, lots of one-to-one stuff, lots of risk assessment, lots of training, you name it. If there's a psychological need, we do it. Every year we have looked into whether the service has been helpful. So every year we will do a survey for young people, for residential workers, or social workers. We don't do all three every year, we do one of the three. And I do have some slides if people wanted them about what the feedback has been. The feedback has been undeniably positive. People are really, really grateful for a service. Foster carers were up in arms when there was a thought that there might not be enough money to keep the service going. And ultimately the belief is that it does save the council money. And unfortunately that is what it comes down to, because we're in a difficult time. So the vision, now this is based on Forth Valley. I think it should be based on Scotland, but coming from Forth Valley, I'm basing it there. The vision would be that all looked after children in Forth Valley, in Scotland, are important, and actually a specialist service is really required. The CAMHS service are so understaffed and they're so overwhelmed, and they've got a lot of things of their own to deal with, so they cannot be offering one-to-one support for foster carers or going in and giving some supervision for residential workers. Each looked after child deserves a specialist service that will meet their need. It's got to be quickly, it's got to be evidence-based, and it's got to be competent. It's got to be taking in all of this and the adverse childhood experiences as well. And ultimately we're committed to providing better services for looked after children so that they can have greater outcomes in the end. So that's what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. I put together a quick proposal for Forth Valley as a whole, and Forth Valley takes into account Falkirk Council, Stirling Council and Clackmannanshire Council. We did in the past do some work with Clackmannanshire Council, and at the moment we provide a service just for Falkirk Council. And genuinely what Falkirk Council get compared to what Stirling Council get is chalk and cheese. Falkirk Council are getting a much more dedicated service. Stirling Council are getting everything that CAMHS can offer, but it's the service that Falkirk got in the past. And I think this probably needs to be rolled out across all of Scotland, because I think that everyone could do with a specialist mental health psychological service. Thank you very much.